What are your family's darkest secrets? Are they as crazy as these ones we're about to tell? Grab a blanket, turn off your lights for true, scary, dark secrets within the family. My life in a Truman Show reality. There have been several instances I felt like I'm living in a Truman Show situation, for lack of a better term. For some time, there have been events in my life that just make me scratch my head and question things that lack a logical or solidified explanation. For context, I'm a man of science. I've got a bachelor's degree in comparative physiology, a master's in epidemiology, and currently am in medical school. Furthermore, I have almost a decade of research experience and have worked in science fields for almost the same amount of time. I thrive on data, facts, evidence, and seek the sources for explanations rather than jump to some greater conclusion. Although I have many experiences of these Truman Show moments, this is one of the ones that keeps me up and most likely will always keep me up. There was this one relative that I had, let's call her Lynn for the sake of privacy, whom I've never met, yet was one of my closest relatives. Per my father, she was his cousin, but of his estranged uncle who lived on the opposite side of the country. His uncle, my great uncle, was a shifty man. He worked for the government of Virginia in the 30s through the late 60s, early 70s, but no one really knew what he did. He somehow managed to avoid the World War II draft despite being selected, which many of our family members found strange but didn't question it any further. Anyways, Lynn was his daughter, and she married to a lawyer from New York, but they never had any children, and neither of them had any siblings, allegedly. She never worked because he was traditional, but she also didn't need to because as a lawyer did okay for himself. The more bizarre factor here is that no one ever met Lynn, her husband, or either of their sets of parents. A lot of us think it was strange, but at the same time, it did make some sort of sense given her father was estranged from the family. The most that the family had contact with her was through the very rare letter and or phone call. Also, Lynn's husband passed away in the 80s, which has some importance, which will be brought up later. Fast forward to the 90s when I was born. When my parents brought me home, after a couple weeks in the NICU, there was a package from New York addressed to me, not my parents, coming from New York from my cousin Lynn, filled with clothes, toys, all sorts of things a new parent would have bought their own children. My parents tried to call to thank them, but couldn't get a hold of her. At that point, my father and or mother had not heard from her for a couple years. How did she know that we were pregnant or that I was born? There was no announcements in the newspaper, and no one had contact with her for a couple years. This was the first odd instance that my parents will acknowledge was absolutely bizarre and puzzled them to this day. Once I was born, she sent me letters and cards with money throughout my years. It was never a significant, substantial amount. I think the biggest one I ever got was $500 for my 18th birthday. But that's not super relevant. I would also get calls from her on birthdays and holidays to wish me holiday greetings. And then I would send her flowers for her birthday, which was March 11th. But no one actually knew how old she was. We just simply knew that was her birthday was March 11th and that she was allegedly older than my father, but this was never confirmed. This is also another important piece, I promise. Throughout the years, I continued to get calls, cards, letters with money, and we always talked about the same thing, the weather, what I was doing, and then about her cat, Collie, who always signed her card next to her, indicated by a little cat paw print. We actually asked for pictures of her because we wanted to hang it around our house, but no matter how many times we asked, we only ever got drawings, which looked like children's drawings. We were perplexed as to why she never sent a photo, especially when we specifically asked for them. The last time we asked for a photo, we got a drawing that depicted her as an angel. At this point, I was a senior college student and had taken some psych courses and had been deep into my studies, so I asked if there were any developmental issues, mental illnesses that she had or that my parents or family members were aware of, which no one said they thought so. She lived on her own independently, except she had a cleaning lady come once a week to do her bedding, which she hated washing and doing, not to mention the fact that she was starting to get up there in her age, since my father was, and he was kind of the marker for her age. Our second to last phone call, I expressed to her that my father and I wanted to visit her. After over 2 decades of sending money for birthdays, holidays, etc., I felt the need to visit her and thank her in person and learn more about her. She was unsure about it, but seemed to come around to it. I said next time we talk, we can work at a time that's good for all of us, just to give her some space, since she seemed apprehensive to actually meeting us. The following month was my birthday, which she sent me a check, and of course I called her to say thank you like I always did. She seemed fine and her normal self. We talked about coming up to New York again to meet her, and we agreed on a date 3 months away. I'll never forget the last words that she said: "We're always on your side," which I felt was a little strange because she used to say, "I'm always on your side," never "we." There was no we. She lived by herself. Her cat had passed away at that point. She still had her housekeeper come by, but she'll still never refer to them as we. A week and a half later, my dad called me saying that my cousin had passed away. This was in the summer of 2017. I felt awful that I never got to meet her and that she was so interested and invested in my life. I was upset about this, but no one seemed to be fazed about her passing. When I spoke to my family member, her cousins, my aunts and uncles, they said they hadn't heard from her in decades, now that they also had kids my generation, but she never took an interest in any of them, even some cousins who were older than me. Some of them didn't even know who she was, which just puzzled me even further. We don't even know what she passed from. When I asked my dad about a funeral, he said there wasn't word on it. When I asked him how he heard about her passing, since no one but me and my parents talked to her, he said it was the hospital who called them and informed him. There was no funeral, which further made me scratch my already very puzzled head. But I figured maybe she didn't have close family. There wasn't going to be a funeral or memorial service. After a period of grievances, I didn't think much of her after that. It's tough to think that someone you've never met nonetheless knows what she looks like and have only had phone calls with. Over a year passes by, and now it's December 2018. I get a letter from a law office in New York addressed to me. In the thick manila envelope was a copy of her will. As I was reading the will line by line, I was nodding to myself. $10,000 to her church, that makes sense. $5,000 to her housekeeper, yeah, that makes sense. And then I get to the last line. She left me her remaining possessions, including her house, its contents. And there was a second address that I'd never seen before. I was so flabbergasted and puzzled. Flabbergasted from the fact that she left me everything, not my parents, nor my father, her closest blood relative, me. Further puzzled, I was not only inheriting one house, but a second one that I haven't even heard of before. She never even mentioned them in our calls, letters, cards. She didn't really leave much, just go to church, get her hair done, and then go to the doctor's appointments. She usually had her housekeeper help her order things, groceries, household products, etc. I found the business card from the firm that sent me her will. I called the firm and asked to speak with the lawyer that signed the letter attached to her will. He was very professional and cordial on the phone and explained that it was the old firm owner that had drafted the will with her, and he never actually met her either. I glanced at the dates, and the will was actually written in 2003, which would have meant I was 7 years old or so at that point. I don't really recall talking to her. That didn't really start until I was 10, but she still sent cards, and I usually wrote a horribly legible thank you card with a drawing or a photo of me. Anyways, he reaffirmed the will contents and testament was true. I asked if he was aware of the caseworker, social worker, anything that could give me more insight, which he replied he wasn't aware. I asked that he give the housekeeper my information and told her to call me, and he said he'd pass things along. After I got off the phone with the lawyer, I told my dad about the will and asked about the other property. We had used Google Street View to see her residential property, the one that all her envelopes were addressed from. It was a nice, quaint 1920s bungalow in the suburbs. There was one house across from hers, but there wasn't much else around her other than woods. We looked at the second property, and it was in the middle of nowhere, but the house was massive, and according to tax records, was estimated to be appraised at $1.2 million, given in a lakefront property with 23 acres. Not even 48 hours later, I was called by a representative from the state of New York stating that they were going to liquidate the property to cover her medical bills. I didn't quite know how to react, so I just responded, "Okay, let me know if you need any more information," and hung up. Part of me thinks that's some part of gigantic ruse or Truman Show reality that I got too close to the truth to, and so they burned the ties. This is about as much as I can remember from this part of my life, and it's still relatively fresh, but I still wonder who or what my cousin was. Was she legit or was she part of something bigger? I fear that I'll never find out. I tried to look into her husband. He very much was a person and is well documented, but the interesting part is that his obituary, there were no mentions of his wife or any other family. There wasn't even a survived by section. I feel like I'll never get answers, but I guess time will tell. My great aunt tried to poison us? Me, 20-year-old female, great aunt, 88-year-old female, when she passed. I'm not related to my great aunt by blood. She was my maternal grandmother's brother's wife. They were quite wealthy. He used to be a well-known lawyer and she had a rich family. And they lived in a large house near one of the capital's old canals. They never had any children. This was in part due to their workaholic lifestyle and their love for traveling. But I think there's also some fertility issues because she's always wanted her nieces and nephews to come and visit them. My great uncle had been in feeble health for years after a couple of ICHs following his retirement, which left him quickly tired and a very slow speaker. He was still the most intelligent person I've ever met. When he eventually died, my aunt became even more clingy, always wanting us to come and visit her. The story. My aunt lived about 2 hours away from us, which may not seem like a lot, but it was still the other side of the country for us. I guess a little bit of research will tell you which country I mean. So, with my parents being busy with work and my siblings, 17-year-old male and female me, being young and not very interested in visiting our older relatives all the time, we didn't see our aunt very often. When we did visit, probably once every 2 months or so, boy was she happy. It always made me feel a bit guilty, but it was not like she didn't have a large social circle. She was quite the socialite. Her own family was old money. She would spoil us children, although we teenagers had to fake our enthusiasm when we were being gifted jigsaw puzzles and antique books on German grammar. She would have her cook, make elaborate meals, and truth be told, it was always delicious. After dinner, we would have all tea and biscuits in her living room, talking and talking. That and that friend would have cancer again, and she'd be the nice gallery opening last week. How are we doing at school? Why would I go to university for? Typical rich old people talk, I guess. My aunt was a bit obsessed with tea. Her tea would always have these exotic, insanely sweet flavors and had to be tasted and analyzed throughout. Old rich people antics, no biggie. She was eccentric. If she didn't have money, she would have been called crazy, but hey, rich people are eccentric. We didn't realize the pattern and what would happen next, but now that I look back on it, I can see it. After dinner and tea time, we would get very tired, not knocked out tired, but drowsy nonetheless. Most of the time, my father would still drive us home in the evening, very dangerous in hindsight, but sometimes we had to spend the night at my aunt's. It made us even more hesitant to come visit her, but she would call and whine about how lonely she was. We thought our sleepiness was caused by her talking and wanting to know everything about us. She was an emotional leech. If we would spend the night, she was ecstatic and would prepare breakfast on bed for us and try to get us to both stay the rest of the day. I remember one time when I was about 14 or 15 years old that my brother became very ill when we were there. We had to spend the night there because my father had had a decent amount of wine and my mother was just too tired to drive. We had breakfast, again accompanied by my aunt's tea, and went to visit a museum with her whilst my parents slept in a bit. While watching a painting by our country's greatest painter in the main hall, my brother threw up all over the security fence in front of the painting. I'm talking projectile vomiting. It barely missed the huge painting, and we were quickly escorted to the bathroom by a panicked security guard. My little brother looked awful, pale as a ghost, throwing up every few minutes, his vomit becoming clear and a little bloody. The guard suggested she call an ambulance, but my aunt refused and took us home. It was a 10-minute walk, and my brother threw up 2 times in the canals under loud applause of a few drunken British tourists. So we came home, and my parents were obviously very worried. We were all feeling a bit nauseous, so they all suggested taking my brother to a doctor. Again, my aunt refused, putting him in her bed and drowning him in blankets and hot water bottles. She said something like, "Oh, maybe you should stay a few days to get him better," but my parents put us in the car and we drove home. When we got home, my brother was already feeling a lot better, so he didn't see a doctor after all. Now the time when I finally realized something was wrong. About 2 years ago, we visited my aunt a few days before Christmas. I just had my tonsils removed and it hurt as hell. All was fine when we arrived, the usual talking and eating. I didn't eat a lot because swallowing was practically impossible. My aunt insisted I drank some tea, but I couldn't drink anything hot, so I kept telling her no thank you. That evening, I stayed remarkably clear despite my pain meds. I could, however, see how my family became a bit drowsy. They spoke slower and a bit incoherently and complained about being tired at 10 p.m. I thought it was weird, especially because I remained so clear. I chalked it up to me being on edge because of the hunger and not participating in the dull conversations because of the pain I was in. It's only now that I think if only I had said something. When my aunt died, my family had a little get-together after the funeral to remember her and sharing stories. The being tired and staying over scenario was told quite a bit by my uncle, his wife, my cousin, my parents. Everyone became a bit uncomfortable, but we thought nothing of it. But hey, she was dead. You couldn't say something like that. Right now, I'm almost 100% sure that there was something in the tea. The only time I didn't become sleepy was when I didn't drink her tea, although she kept insisting throughout the evening. I guess she wanted us with her, close to her, after her husband died. I did a bit of research, aka Google, these past few days, and I'm pretty sure it was some kind of coping escape mechanism. I don't really bring it up because she's dead, and I don't even know how to bring up such an unbelievable accusation. It makes me both sad and angry. Sad because she was obviously lonely and wanted her family to be close, but also angry because she took an enormous risk and it could have ended very badly. My brother, the children, getting the same spiked tea as the adults. Obviously, she's dead, so I can't say let's not meet, but I think it was a scary situation nonetheless. Aunt wanted to keep the bloodline pure. Thanksgiving 2018. It's been a while since I've been home because I moved states away, so Thanksgiving I got to see my family I hadn't seen for a while. Everyone was showing up to my parents' house, and at one time I would greet them and ask if they needed any help bringing anything in. First my grandparents and then some cousins and friends of family that either didn't have family or lived too far away to go home. Everyone was nice and friendly, and it was awesome seeing everyone. Then Aunt Colleen showed up. "Oh, look how big and handsome you've gotten. Wow, look at you." Like normal aunts say, no big deal. She then gives me a hug and then turns her head to try to kiss me on the mouth. My family does not do that. I turn my head and she kisses my neck. Yikes. I feel weird. I shrug her off and she asks me how school has been, so we talk. She regularly interrupted me to tell me how much I've grown. Most relatives show up, so I peel myself away from her to go help others. She follows me. She comes up from behind me and puts her hands on my hips. Oh my God, look how much he's grown. Isn't he handsome? I'm embarrassed and relatives are noticing of how off she's being. In front of all relatives, including grandparents, she would act like that's showing me off. She would guide me around with her hand on my lower back. I excuse myself to the restroom to get away. I regain composure, sneak out and find some cousins and start chatting it up with them. A few minutes pass and then hands slide onto my shoulders from behind me and start rubbing my shoulders as to massage me. I didn't move. I felt her hair on the back of my neck as she leaned down, put her lips on my ears and said, "I'll be right back. I'm gonna go puff out this cigarette. Don't move," and walks off. I'm wide-eyed. My cousins are just as appalled as I am. I'm pretty grossed out at this point. I feel bad because I don't see my family very often, but this is too much for me. I apologize to my mom that something came up and that I have to go. I walk out to my car. She was standing next to my car smoking her cigarette. She smiled at me and I told her I'd be right back, that I was just going to the store to get some more plasticware. Because we had run out, she asked me if I needed any help going to the store, and I told her that's okay and assured her I would be right back. She winked at me and told me to hurry back. Not sure if this belongs here, but it's cringe.